Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumais Perek Yud. We're learning today Halacha Beis and Halacha Gimel. Today's daf is daf Tzadik Gimel, and we left off on daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amud by the brackets Rabbi Yosi Mater B'Shel Chitim V'Chulei. So quickly reviewing that part of Halacha Beis, which is the Mishnah spoke about a person who placed a loaf of bread. In the Mishnah's case, a loaf of hot bread. In the Gemara, we learned for sure the same would be loaf that's not hot. A person placed it on top of an open barrel of truma wine. So Rabbi Meir says that the bread absorbs the vapor of the wine. And let's go with how some understand. Rav Meir will hold that reicha milsehi. Bottom line is, Rav Meir says that non-kohanim are not allowed to eat the bread. Rabbi Yehuda says, mater. Let's go with reicha lav milsehi. And then we had Rabbi Yosi, and that's where we're going to start today, that Rabbi Yosi says, Rabbi Yosi mater b'shel chitim, but v'oiser b'shel so'oidim, and Rabbi Yosi says the words, mipnei shahaso'oidim shoy avois. In other words, barley has something unique, that it draws in the vapor of the wine. So if you have a bread made out of barley, dafka, then he will agree with Rabbi Meir. The Gemara is going to begin today by speaking about, let's call this, I know that Rabbi Gordon of blessed memory always speaks about the 7-layered cake. We're going to speak about a 2-layered bread. 2-layered bread, this is important. There's only one crust around everything, but inside of the crust, you have a bottom part, a top part, and we're going to see, let Rabbi Yosi, what happens if the bottom part is barley, the top wheat, or the other way around. We did make a mention at the end of last year, which is already on top of that Tzadik Gimel, regarding the Talmidim, and they're putting the bread on top of the barrel of Murias, that there's a big difference whether the bread is whole, which would mean that there is a crust that's surrounding all of the bread, which on some level prevents the vapor from coming inside the bread, versus a cut up bread that when we learned in the Gemara that even Rabbi Yehuda, that's matter in the Mishnah, will be moedem. That's one way of learning it. If we're going to go with reicha milsehi, reicha lav milsehi, won't make a difference. But on some level, there's a difference. Maybe it's more than vapor goes in, but whole or not whole, and that's going to be very consequential in the topic that we're going to have right now. And we'll leave it at, and then we're going to go to the second part in the Mishnah of Halacha Beis. The Mishnah spoke about an oven that was fired up with cumin, with kamoin of truma. Here again, based on the rule that reicha lav milsehi, even though bread was baked in the heat of truma, of a truma product, you can have that. You can have the bread of the oven. Again, reicha lav milsehi. The Gemara is actually going to quote the machloikes amoraim between Rav and Levi, whether reicha milsa, reicha lav milsa. Even if we were to learn pshat in the Mishnah, the way the Maral Fulda learns pshat, that the machloikes Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is about reicha milsa, reicha lav milsa, it's not that unusual that you have now a machloikes amoraim, like whom is the halacha. And we're going to learn here, Shitas Levi, like whom we paskin, bidi eved, that reicha lav milsa. Actually, we're going to point out that there is a machloikes, a very important machloikes, between the Bavli's version of Levi versus the Yerushalmi version of Levi. We'll speak that out when we learn the Gemara inside. That is up until Halacha Gimel. In the third Mishnah, in Halacha Gimel, we're going to continue to speak about the sugya of tam ke'ikr, of tam. And we're going to be learning about tilson. In English, it's called fenugreek. When Kevin will come online, he'll put a picture of fenugreek if it's going to help you. Now, fenugreek, I know that we learned, a pre-eitz hadar, that the esrig is unique, that tam eitzoy ketam piryoy. We learned this. We're going to learn today in Mishnah that not in the tree kingdom, but in the legume kingdom, that tilson, tam eitzoy ketam piryoy. Very interesting. Now, by truma and meiser sheni, which is tithings, what part of the tilson is consecrated? Only the seeds, not the stalks. Even though the stalks have the same taste of the seeds. And therefore, let's go to the sugi of tam ke'ikr, right? Not the reicha. We're going to go halacha gimels back to tam. So if you have tilson of truma, got mixed in with other items. Let's go now that we apply the rule of 60. that if there's 60 against 1, then the tam is nullified, right? You mixed it together, you had it soaking together, you removed the tilson, but the tam of the truma is in the food, tam ke'iker. What happens if you have 60 against the seeds, but you don't have 60 against the seeds and the stalks? So the Mishnah will tell you that since by Truma and Bikurim, Truma and Meiser Sheni, the stalks are not consecrated b'kedushas Truma, the stalks are not consecrated b'kedushas Meiser Sheni, even though they have the same taste. So it's amazing. You have food, you're going to taste the tam of tilson in it. But since it's also coming from the stalks, as long as you have the amount needed to be mevatel, the tam coming from only the seeds, you will be allowed, a non-kohen will be allowed to eat the food. In contrast to Shvius, to Kili Akerem, and to Hegdish, that if Tilson is from Shvius, or Kili Akerem, or Hegdish, all of it is consecrated. And therefore, you're going to have the bittul against all of it. By the way, just to know, the numbers are different. Like by Kili Akerem, you have to have the ratio of 200 to 1 to nullify it. Min b'minoi. And by the way, it's going to be a by the way, but since we're going to be speaking about bittul, and the Mishnah is also going to be speaking about Kilei HaKerem, we're going to chazer a very important machlokes. Meir, the Chachamim, there are certain things that are never nullified. Midrabanan. One of them is a davar chashuv. What makes something a davar chashuv? L'Rab Meir, something that's ordinarily sold by number. So we're going to chazer that tilson, if it's bundled, bundles are sold by number. L'Rab Meir, it will never be nullified. And we're going to go into some nuance. How big does the bundle have to be for it to become something that's sold b'minyan? So we're going to get a little bit off on a tangent on that. And then we're going to conclude, hopefully, today's daf by a very foundational machlokes based on the same rule, which is that when are items, when do items have to be tithed? When they reach their final step, by their gemar melacha. When whatever you did is completed. And I know by grains, again and again, meruach is generally the gemar melacha, which means after you do the threshing and after you do the winnowing, you already separated everything. Not only that, but you smooth the pile on the threshing floor. Even though that when we learn Rambam, we learn a lot about the Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. I'm saying this on my own. So the way the Rambam reconciles is the Gemar Melacha Re'iyas Pnei Habayis is the Gemar Melacha de Meruach. Let Rambam, it depends. If the item that you have in your fields are going to be sold in the market, that means that they're never intended to be brought home. So the Gemar Melacha is the Meruach. That's the way it worked. Meruach today would be when it's packaged. That will be today's modern meruach. Now that it's packaged, you can sell it to the markets. The wholesaler can sell it to the markets for them to retail it. If you're not planning to sell it in the shuk, if you're planning to take it home, you actually have to bring it home. But let's go back to the meruach. Being that the Mishnah is going to speak about tilson, and it's not just about tilson. Now, tilson, as we just said, there are the stalks, there are the seeds. We're going to make it clear that the gemar melacha of tilson is not meruach. They don't do meruach there. And that will be a big klal gadol that we're going to, for sure, go throughout the many future mesechtas, even though we're spoiled because we learn Rambam. So that Rambam will put it all together, is that every single item has another gemar melacha. And in Chazal, we find what they are. But today, we'll be contrasting the gemar melacha of tilson, which is the point from where you can't even snack on tilson achilas arai, because the chalois chiyuv came in, versus grain. And I just want to say, just in the words of introduction, because these things are so foundational. And again, this we know because we learned at Rambam, that there are two steps when it comes to Trumas HaMaisres, not to confuse them. Oinas HaMaisres, Gemar Melacha. Oinas HaMaisres means, Shloima, that if something did not even reach its Oinas HaMaisres, not only, which would mean if something did not even grow to a third of its full mature growth, so it was harvested prematurely, it's not halachically something that ever has to be tithed. Not pshat, you're not chayiv to tithe it. Even if you separated the Trumas HaMaisres, what you did is inconsequential. It's nonsense. There's nothing. It's not Michael Adam. even if you are going to eat it, halachically. Then you have something that came to Oinas HaMaisris, like I harvested my stalks, shibalim. I'm not chayiv to tithe it this second. If I tithed it, higdimu b'shibalim, it's going to be chal. Remember that. But people don't have to do it. And l'may nafkamina, am I allowed to snack? Once something was harvested, even though it's Oinas HaMaisris, even midrabanan, I can have achilas sarai. Once something reaches gemar melacha, you're not even allowed to eat snack. And we're going to review this again and again and again. This is a good, I'm saying this just for Shloim over here. The chap this is very important. Again, let's go with the Marafulda, that the Machlokes Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda in the Mishnah regarding the hot bread on top of an open barrel of Truma wine. Rab Meir oiser, Rab Yehuda mater. The Marafulda says, the Machlokes is whether Reicha Milsahi, Reicha Lav Milsahi, and Rab Yosi has as an in-between shita. It looks, in other words, Rab Yosi holds on some level Reicha Milsahi. But who told you? Maybe it's quantity. How much of the reicha went into the bread? He says only barley bread. Barley bread absorbs so'oidim shoyavois. So there a non-kohen cannot eat it. But wheat bread you could eat. So says the Gemara, okay, now that we have this rule, what were to happen if you made a double layered bread? I don't know if they do this in the markets. We're not talking about flour that's mixed from different grains. We're not talking about that. We're talking about someone who made two doughs. Where's your father when we need him over here? And they put them together, one on top of the other. So when you put it in the oven, this is the nakuda. There is one crust. The crust is the krum, because the crust is hard. There's one crust, but when you cut the bread open, there is mesudar, a bottom, tam, dough, chveis, bread from wheat, top, barley. That's what we're talking about. So he says like this, that if you make such a double layer bread, let Rabbi Yosi, and you have the dough that came from wheat, flour, milmaton, and the siyoidin is milmailon, even though it's one bread, but what part is directly on top of the barrel? In case number one, the chitim, Rabbi Yosi holds that chitim does not draw, even though the siyoidin does. The so'idim doesn't have koyach to draw through the chitim. And indeed, let Rabbi Yosi, a non-kohen can eat all of the bread. Since the so'idim are on top of the chitim, which would mean that according to Rabbi Yosi, even though the top is made out of barley, a non-kohen can have the whole bread. And then the opposite, so'idim milmaton v'chitim milmailon, another chiddush. So you would think maybe let Rabbi Yosi, a non-kohen can only not eat the bottom. No. Once the vapor begins to go in, then it goes into the wheat. Rabbi Yosi holds that a wheat bread is mutter, crust. Once it went through the crust, once the vapor penetrated the crust, why did it do it? Because the barley is in the bottom. So now it's soft to soft. There is no crust in between. That's the word. Kshem shahasa oidim shoyavois, kach hakitim shoyavois, marafulda, 6 lines from the top, bepas echod mighty, shalamayla nasa mechitim umalmata min asi oidim, kshem chule, hoil v'shoyavois oidim derech hakrum, once the vapor of the truma wine penetrated the krum is crust. So now it's already in the bread. Even with Rabbi Yosi, if it's already inside, it's going to go into the chitim. Shuv havalei legabe chitim gavaldik. Mamish, the way we learned above at the end of last year, that once the bread is cut, everyone will hold that the bread absorbs the vapor because there is no crust that's being choylitz, that's interposing or that's stopping the vapor. Okay. The second part of halacha beis was an oven that was fired up, that was heated up. With the example the Mishnah gave was with kamoin of truma, like we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah. First of all, it doesn't matter whether this was done be'isr or beheter. We're not talking about that. Don't forget, truma is not asr ba'na. That's another din that we learned. So let's go to the best case. A kohen had kamoin that became tamei. This is what the kamoin is meant to be used for fuel. and he used it. And now you brought the oven up to whatever the temperature is that you need to break bread. The oven retains the heat. Comes a Yisrael and he puts a spita bed over there in the oven. Mishnah says you can eat it. You can mamish. There is you can taste the kamoin. Doesn't matter. The Mishnah at the end is paskening reichalav milsi. Okay, now the ground zero topic by the Amoyroim regarding Rechem Milsa, Rechalav Milsa, Michal, this is mamish for you because you asked this question before Shabbos. Mao litzloi shnei shapudim. Are you allowed to roast? Now, guys, the ovens that we are talking about, just to have the image, it was an oven that had an opening from above. They used to, that's the way we would have the Korban Pesach. There was fire in the oven, and they would have spits, and they would insert the spits inside the oven. I'm adding that detail that there was an opening in the oven, like I spoke out, that there is a discussion amongst contemporary poskim, even though in the Shulchan Aruch we paskin that bidi eved kishitas habavli, we paskin like Levi. What Levi says, machlokas Bavli Yerushalmi. According to the Bavli, Levi says bidi eved it's okay, and so paskins the Shulchan Aruch. Some say that in today's ovens, if you at the same time kosher and treif, at this, even though reichalav milsi, it's closed. It's closed. So therefore, there is a greater, let's say, penetration of the vapor. But here, the ground zero is you have two shapudim, two spits. One of them is basar shchuta, the echad shel b'sar nevela, and you put them in the same oven. I mean, this is the shaila. And also, just a chazer, that in halach, in Shulchan Aruch, we differentiate between reicha and zeya. The word zeya is used with different meanings depending on the context. Sometimes when we speak about fruit juices, we call the juices zeya ba'alma. That's not the meaning of zeya in our conversation. Zeya means a lot more vapor. Zeya is what comes up from liquid. So when you pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea and you see the smoke, the steam, that's called zeya. That's worse than reicha. It's more substantial than reicha. If you remember in the Rambam, when the Rambam spoke about tuma, that tuma does not go through a column of liquid. So if I have a bottom cup, that's tamei. I have a top cup, that's tahor. The waters in the top are tahor. The waters in the bottom are tamei. And I pour, cold, I pour. So there's a column of water. So we know that even the column remains tahor. Even the column. But if the Rambam writes, if the bottom cup is hot, top cup is cold, because of the rule of Tatar Gavad, this is a physical thing. You're going to see vapor coming up. The vapor will be metame everything. Vapor is zeya. Reicha is meat. Now, I'm not saying the meat is a hard piece of meat. It's meat in the oven. We know meat in the oven. If you have a good piece of meat, it's juicy. But that's not, it's still called a salad. So by solids, like this, Rav Yirmiyah Amar b'Shem Rav. This is a machlokes that we have both in Bavli Psachim and in Avodah Zarah. Psachim daf ayin vav, Avodah Zarah daf samach vav. Rav says also, Ushmuel Amar b'Shem Levi muter. Now this girsa is not repeated in the Bavli. The word muter means lechatchila. In the Yerushalmi, we have the same memra Shmuel b'Shem Levi that if you did it, it's good. Mamash. In other words, and now we paskin like the girsa of the Yerushalmi. That's very consequential because guys, if we would paskin the way the Yerushalmi has shitas b'Shem Levi, then we would say lechatchila you can put them together. We don't paskin lechatchila you can put it together, but we're learning the Yerushalmi. He holds you can do it. Asks the Gemara. How can Rav say what he says when pligamas nisal Rav? The truth is, I don't know if the Yerushalmi that's even a kasha. In the Bavli, sometimes we ask a kasha and then we answer Rav Tanuhu Palik. I don't think in the Yerushalmi it works this way. We had this a few times already. I think the koyach of Rav in the Yerushalmi was so strong, and they are in the earlier Amoyroim, they had no problem with that. They're just pointing out that the Rav appears to be going against what it says in a Brais. It says in a Braisa, Ein soilem shnei psachim etanur echad b'pnei ataroivus. Now let me explain to you what taroivus means. There is a unique din by Korban Pesach, which is that who can eat a Korban Pesach? Only the people that prior to the shechita of the Pesach were manui, were counted in on that carbon. Remember that din. Nishtam, shechtit, and then call whoever wants can come and eat it. And if I was counted in on this Pesach, then I'm chayiv to eat this Pesach. If I was not one of the minuyim on this Pesach, I'm not allowed to eat it. So the Braisa says you're not allowed to put two shpudim betanur echad at the same time. You know why? Because the minuyim will eat the other one. They might get mixed up. So you got a problem of people not having the carbon that they were counted in. Now I have another issue. The Gemara is asking. Let's make believe you'll never make such a confusion. For example, the shapudim are different colors. Team blue, team red. Then you would be allowed to do it if there's no chashash of taroivis. Okay, but I have another problem. Problem is that the vapor, the reyach of one goes into the other. So the Gemara says that lo yamru elo, the only issue in the Braisa is pnei taroivis, which implies ho shaloi mipnei taroivis. Then there would not be a problem. Does that not prove that this Braisa holds reicha lav milsa, right? Gevaldik. And that's that. And Azoyi does. Again, it's not a kasha the way I understand it. Now the Mara Fulda somehow wants to reconcile. So if you look inside the Mara Fulda, it's towards the end of the narrow lines. It's Divrei HaMaschil Mepnei HaTaroivis. Once he explained that, you see, the only issue is Taroivis. What about the Reicha? Reicha is not an issue. So then he says, and by the dot, Umimas Nisan, meaning from this Braisa, Ein lahakshis l'Rav. But you can't contradict Rav from it. Or if you're not going to say that Rav Tano Palig, you can't refute Rav. Why not? The Shani Hachem, the Mikle Kale Isura, the issue of Minuyin, you can argue. If as long as I am eating from the piece of meat that I was counted in on, Reicha of the other one is not as a strict of an Isur as Truma for a non-Kohen, or as the Machlekes Rav and Levi was about Treif. Basan Avela. Basan Avela is a more stringent. Interesting. Then he adds another thing. Even if you're going to say, who told you that? Who told you that? Maybe it's the same Yisr Doiraisa. The Doibisha says there has to be Menuyin. So he says that it could be that when they were baking the two things together by the Carbon Pesach, they had a pile of firewood in between. They put the shput all the way in bottom of the oven. So there was a wall. I know the wall didn't go all the way to the top. A wall of coal, a wall of fuel. So since there was a separation between this and that, maybe that's why the only issue is taroivis, and there isn't an issue of tam. But if they would put them together, there would be an issue of tam. And the machlokes of Rav and Levi says the Mara Fulda is when you're putting them together in an oven. Together meaning there's nothing intervening. And like I spoke out last year, guys, when we go on airplanes and you have your kosher hot food, avada, there's no problem. Not b'di'evid, because we paskin like Revi, because the food is packaged. The packaging keeps out halachically the whatever reicha could cause does not cause. Okay, beautiful. Says the Gemara. Now don't forget that it wasn't Rav and Levi; it was Rav and Shmuel. Shmuel b'shem Levi. So now l'chayda, that's the hemshech. Now we're going to have another machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. May Tzasrei. Now, Tzasrei, let's go with it's penny royale. Where's Kevin when we need him? And we're speaking about juices that oozed out from the penny royale. Penny royale was speaking about Truma. B'chlal, when it comes to fruit juices, now I'm going to use the word Zeya in a different context of before. We're going to halachically say that the juices from the penny royale is b'chlal insignificant. It's called Zeya Ba'alma, and therefore it does not have kedusha as Truma. That's what they're talking about. So Mei Tzasrei, Rav says it's still usher, meaning it's Truma. Shmuel Amar Muter. He views it as Zeya, and I want to tell you a rule. Other than wine and oil, B'chlal, when it comes to other meiperes, we also view it as something insignificant. However, midrabanan, if you have oranges that are truma, midrabanan aviv, the orange juice is truma, midrabanan. Even though orange juice is midrabanan, that meit sasrei is not even midrabanan. It's kind of like a mint, and it's and halachically we don't view the juices as any significance, lesser than other meipedes. Now we have a big bomb. We can spend the whole in yeshiva. You would spend the whole week on this. So you have a machloikas. Rav once came to Shmuel's house. Guys, don't forget Shmuel was a doctor. And Eichel Shmuel Rav made sasrei. Comes Rav to his house. Shmuel held that it's not a problem. It's considered Zeya Ba'alma, not even Midrabanan Truma. And he gave to Rav something that Rav himself held, you're not allowed to have Midrabanan. Now let me ask you, are you allowed to do that? How can you do that? Right, you have a machlekes in halacha whether chalavakum is asan midrabanan or it's not asan midrabanan. And because of the and therefore because of the mirsas you can have it. So if you have a person that holds that you can have chalavakum and they invite a yid that only has chalav yisrael, you can serve it to them because you're the host. Of course, you're not allowed to do that. It's a big problem. Now, just to hop one in the back.
What about any Shabbos at a Svartik's house though, and they have food with liquid on a plata that they eat because 50%, and we don't heat up liquid on Shabbos on a plata, right. But
and they should not serve it
to us. Serve it.
They should not serving it. They serve it to us from their ignorance, and we eat it from our ignorance or from our laziness. Either ignorance or the Yetzer Hara. You're not allowed to do that. So the Marapanim, I'm going Daf Yud Gimel all the way in the whoever's using an art scroll. Let's go that Rav was a chumrah, even if it wasn't Isur D'Rabbanan. So what? The Rav was machmer. How can you give it to him? Efsher the Basar Hacha Hadaverav. He learned pshat in the Yerushalmi that the Gemara is trying to tell you that the Rav went back. And how do we know that? From the fact that Shmuel gave it to him, not from the fact that the Rav ate it, because maybe Rav would have it if he wouldn't know what he's being given. This is a biggie. And it's a chumrah, that's not an isur midrabanan. Maybe other people learn pshat that, Danny, that when it comes to a chumrah and you're in my house, then I don't have to be concerned about your chumras. Maybe that would be the pshat. I can feed you food that you would not eat mitzad chumrah, but you're in my home. Okay, says the Gemara, Chodein Tavya, you had roasted meat, the meat that we spoke about before, 2 spits of meat that were roasted together, Basar Shchuta and Basar Nevela, Rav Chia Barashi B'Shem Rav, Mishager Le Bacharusa. You know how careful Rav was. Wasn't only that Rav did not put them together in the oven. That Avada Reicha Milsahi, Rav held in Allah to have it. But what about not putting it at the same time? What about that? Rav, 2 ways of understanding what he did. Either he would sweep out the oven with a broom to make sure that none of the coals that were there while the basar nevela was being roasted remains in the oven because some of the fats might be on the coals, or he would take a broom and burn it, like he would kasher it. Even more, he would like a kasher it between the milchiks and the fleishiks. By the way, today we don't even use the same oven, ideally. We don't use the same oven for milchiks and fleishiks. This is all connected to this. The way how do you know what Rav did? So again, bacharusa means a date palm. So either it means he would sweep out the coals, or more than that, he would burn something else in the oven in between, so to say, to burn out the reicha of the basar nevela. Bottom line is, we paskin that b'di'eved reicha lav milsa. B'di'eved. That means that what happens is milchiks and fleishiks, that you should know that now ovens, huh? No, I said before that some people are machmer that in our ovens, because it's completely closed, even though reicha lav milsa b'di'eved at the same time. If someone were to bake milchiks and fleishiks, yeah, but it's not the way it used to be. I know there's a vent, but it's not open. It was open then. Maybe not. There's a discussion about it. If it happens, that means we're talking about not you baking meat in a milchik oven. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you having milchiks and fleishiks in the oven at the same time. I can say theoretically, b'diavad, you'll be okay. Rechalav milsi. If something was filled with water, zeya, then you'll have a problem. That's going to be the thing. Okay, next mission. So we spoke out in the introduction. There's an herb called tilson, fenugreek. Tilson is unique that the stalks and the seeds have the same taste, yet since it's grown primarily for its seeds, the halacha is that when you are toirim, or when you turn the end meiser sheni, speaking about these two steps, truma means trumas meiser, the stalks don't have kedushas truma. It's amazing. So therefore, says the Mishnah, as now tilson that fell into a bar shalmayim. And what's the issue? The issue now is nois and tam. Nois and tam, remember, min b'she'ena minoi nois and tam. Let's go with what we know today, that if there was 60 times water against the tilson, then you're good. What the emes is, you did not have 60 against the whole thing. You have 60 against the seeds. You don't have 60 against the seeds and the stalks, which means that the water will have the tam of tilson. It won't be a problem. Why won't it be a problem? Because since the tam from the stalks don't have kedushas truma, I only have to be concerned about the seeds. That's what the Mishnah is saying. Tilson that fell into a boit of mayim, and we're speaking whether it is truma, so the issue is whether a non-kohen can eat it or not, or whether what fell in was ma'aser sheni, does the waters have to be consumed in Yerushalmi at HaKodesh or not? So the din is, im yesh bazera kedei litn tam, then you got a problem. Before the Babli of Echad B'Shishim, we just learned it last week. You have to make believe the seeds are onions, and if that would be strong enough to impart taste only from the seeds, then you got a problem. But avoloi ba'etz, don't be concerned at all about the same exact taste of tilson that's coming out of the stalks. Even though tam eitzioi ketam pirioi, the din is, when it comes to the kedusha of trumas u'maisris, they only are chal on the seeds. In contrast, says the Mishnah, but when it comes to shvius, right, or when it comes to kilei akerem, or when it comes to hegdish, by all three of them, what becomes consecrated? Midde oiraisa, all of it. So it's different. So if you have tilson of shvius, right, and there, by the way, just for the record, we learned Masechta Shvius. It's not so simple. You have to know the dinam of shvius. It's not pshat. I cannot eat it. I can't do schoida with it. I can't hoard it. I can't take it out of Eretz Yisrael. I have to treat it with a certain amount of sanctity, whatever that is. And that goes on the tam. Here, you have to have nois and tam in the mayim against both the stalks and the seeds. Or if you planted tilson in a vineyard, all of it becomes kilei akerem. V'chuli. Same thing with hegdish. Im yesh bazera u ba'etz kedei litan tam. That's beautiful. Look inside the top of Moshe. U bashvis v'kilei akerem hegdish. There she'af ha'etz asur. So now misharin im yesh bazera u ba'etz kedei litan tam. Or let me use today's words in halacha. You have to have 60 in the mayim against the whole thing that fell in, which is normally what you would think. Now, says the Mishnah, mi shoylei chavila tilson. If you have bundles of tilson, of kilei akerem, so first of all, you have to what? Yidluko, you have to burn it. And I want to tell you something, that even though the Mishnah says bundles, it's not only because it's bundled. We will see soon why the Mishnah mentioned bundles. Just to know the rule, that kilei akerem is asur bahano. That's the way the Mishnah is saying it. Hoyeloi chavila tilsum shal tevel. If you have bundles of tevel, fenugreek, once you are koitish, once you pound them, why would you pound them? Like I mentioned, they are primarily planted for their seeds. Now, I know that when it comes to grain, they are threshed by animals. Tilson is not so strong. That's not the halach yelech. They didn't use animals. They would pound them manually. Once you pounded them, and you estimate how many seeds do you have, now you're chayiv to be mafresh trumas u'maisris, but not stalks on stalks, only for the seeds. umafrish es hazera, and consistent with what we learned in the beginning of the Mishnah, ve'enu tzarech lahafrish es ha'etz. And chevra, that means that you can mamish use the eitz. They use the stalks. And if someone wanted to use the stalks for whatever, no, it's the whole chiyuv of being mafresh trumois until sun is only for the seeds. I'm not going to say even midrabanan. The whole chiyuv of trumos u'maiser until sun to begin with is midrabanan l'chol hadeyas. No one holds that anything other. I'm saying the most chomerdik opinion is that what has to be tithe, grains, and tirash ve'yitzad, and all fruits, the most, but not vegetables, not legumes, not herbs. Midrabanan, even midrabanan, only the seeds. Now, what happens im hifrish? What happens if you designated trumois from the fenugreek before you separated the seeds from the stalks? So lo yoimar echtoish ve'eteles ha'etz ve'etenes hazera. You don't say that what? Now that I already was toidim, I'm going to now pound the stalks. And I'm going to keep the stalks and only give the seeds to the kohen. Elonoisen eso-eitz im hazera. You have to, once, if you were toidim before you separated the seeds from the stalks, you have to give the stalks to the kohen. Look inside the marafulda, 6 lines from the top, the end of the Mishnah. Ve'im hifrish koidim aketisha. Now, eni yochal hafresh min hazera l'chuda. Why? A chumrah. Hoyil v'kara olav shem truma. No, it's when you were mafresh it, you said this is truma. You said it before you separated the seeds from the stalks. So there's something. Tzarech liten oisem ima eitz lakoyin. That's like a twist at the end of the Mishnah. Taka not chal on the stalks. When you give it to the kohen, it's not that now the kohen stalks are truma. They're not, but you have to give it to the kohen. Once you declare truma, you don't get to keep it. Okay, let's begin. So says the Gemara, first of all, when this rule that the Mishnah said, that when it comes to Shviz, or Kilei Akedem and Hegdish, since that sanctity doesn't only go on the seeds, so if it fell into water, you have to have a bittul, you have to have, let's say today's word, 60 against all of it. What we're saying is, but ve'ein, 1 second. Says, ask the Gemara, ve'ein eitz poigim v'chayzer poigim? Says the Marafulda, that l'chayra, it's nice and tam levgam. That's what he's saying. No, it's even if it's sanctified, doesn't the taste that comes from the stalks, are they not poigim it? And what's the kasha? Guys, we learned last week, Machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rab Shimon. Right, Rab Shimon says, and we paskin, nois and tam levgam is okay. Certainly b'di'evet. Rav Meir, we learned the machlokes Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan b'diuk what Rav Meir says. Don't forget, according to Reish Lakish, even to Rav Meir, if something is poigem mit chilasi v'atzoifa, it's also mutter. So now let's go. So why are we concerned with the whole thing when it's nois and tam levgam? So answers the Gemara, 2 answers. Answer number 1 is that our Mishnah follows the Shita that says Nois and Lagam Aser. Now, who compiled the Yerushalmi? Rabbi Yochanan. Here you see, Rabbi Yochanan only was able to give this answer l'shitase, because, like we mentioned, according to Reish Lakish, even according to Rav Meir, if something is poigem mit chilase va'at soifai, it's going to be mutter. For you to answer, our Mishnah only follows the one, which is Rav Meir, the way Rabbi Yochanan understands it, but that's not a good answer, because it's subject to our machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Number 2, we would definitely prefer for our Mishnah not to only follow Das Rav Meir, we actually paskin like Rab Shimon. So we're going to learn Pshat that the Gemara gives a new answer. Why? Very unusual machlokes. The Gemara answers, who told you it's nice and tam levgam? The Gemara is saying that the tam of fenugreek is nice and tam l'shvach. I can say one thing, that for people that take fenugreek supplements, there's a very strong smell. I can understand, I know what it smells like. I can understand why there can be in the Gemara a havamina that it's poigem and a maskana that it's mashbiach. But when anything is potent, you know, al tam vareach ein lehizvakeach, that's an expression, and that's mamish what I see. It's very so beautiful. There was machlekes in the Gemara. Is it shvach or is it pigam? So why? So the one who asked the question says already, if any Greek is pigam. Another side point. Even though tam eitzer tam piriyoy, it must be that the tam that comes from the eitz is not exactly the tam that comes from the seeds. If you were to eat it together, they would taste the same. But the tam that is omitted from must be different, because the Gemara is not asking even on the seeds. The Gemara is only asking that the eitz, right? That was the Gemara's word. The ein ha'eitz poigim. What about the zera? The zera is not poigim. And now the Gemara answers that even the eitz of fenugreek, who told you it's poigim, it's mashbiach. The Mishnah spoke about chavile tilson, and the Mishnah says they have to be burned. And now let's quickly review that when it comes to kili kedem and orla, if they get mixed up min b'minoi, they have the highest ratio midrabana needed to nullify them, and that's echad b'mosayim. Even if you have the echad b'mosayim, let's speak about the kili kedem, then there's another din, that if you bundled this product, and when they are sold, now that they are bundled, they're not sold by weight, they're sold by number. According to Rabbi Meir, davar shubabingen, davar chashuv midrabanan is never going to be nullified. That happens when they are bundled. So since the Mishnah spoke about bundles, and the Mishnah says you have to burn it, and really, like we spoke out in the Mishnah, why did the Mishnah say burn the bundle? The Mishnah should have said you have to burn a stalk. Kili akedem is also mana. You have to. The Torah says, right? Kadosh doesn't mean holy and good, holy and bad, holy not for you. Burning it is even on a stalk. No, the Mishnah is being marames lit Rav Meir that if it's bundled, it's a real problem. It will never be nullified. How big does the bundle have to be, even lit Rav Meir, for it to be a davar chashuv? That's the Gemara's kasha. The kamehi chavila answers the Gemara. This is the halacha. Esrim v'chamisha zidin. Only a bundle that has 25 stalks together. Interesting number. And by the way, even if you have the number of 25, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, you have to know fenugreek. See, we're city boys. Some of them are very thin, like an old man's hair, like the Gabai's hair. I'm not going to talk about mine. Mine is already white. The Gabai taka is still red, but when you're younger, it's thick. It has to be thick bundles. How do you define thick? Amar Rabbi Yechanan, that if they would be made out of straw, 4 bundles can make a bed. You got to love this. The shiurim of the Gemara. The arba minay mita, then do we say that if it has 25 zidin, lit of meir, davar chashuv never bottle. But if it's a elter tilson, if it's thin tilson, yeah, gavaldik. If you can't make a bed out of 4 bundles, even though they have the number of 25, it's not such a davar chashuv. And yes, even lit of meir, it's going to be bottle echad b'mosai. Okay, it's not milsa agavur. Now, and the Mishnah is telling you that you should be toidim mafresh after you were koitish. Now, compare this to grain, aviv. What does koitish mean? You pounded the stalks and you removed the seeds. By wheat, by grain, you know when you're chayiv to be toidim it, not after you thresh it. That's not enough. Not even after you winnow it. Winnow it means that you begashmius remove the shaft. You know when you're chayiv to be toidim uma'asir, grains after the meruach. Why don't we mention meruach here? So now the Gemara is saying, let's appreciate how much Rebbe put in the Mishnah. That milsei amra, from the words of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, from the words of the Mishnah, you see that that even though they are still bundled, as long as they were pounded, in other words, you didn't do the meruach, they're already called tevel. That's what the Mishnah is talking about. And so now, u'ma'ata v'afilu b'shibalim, well, how far back do you go? And why would that be? In other words, afilu b'shibalim is a Gemara's kasha. Why don't we say the same thing by grain? Why don't we say the same thing by grain? Why is the Gemara? So the Gemara answers, because it's not the same Gemara malach. Answers the Gemara, ain't machnisun l'chein. That grains are not brought inside the house. Let me also say the words. They're not brought in the market to sell when they are still bundled. They're not even brought into the house or sold when you separate it on some level after the winnowing. They're only completed, not finished. Someone gets married, they can be completed or finished. That's the big difference. I know it's very similar, but it's very different. So, let me say it like this. A grain is primarily grown for flour. You have to appreciate that. That's why in the earlier stages, it's not considered completed. By the way, even the meruach is not flour, but at least it's close to flour. The seeds of tilson are not made into flour. They are consumed the way they are. Says the Gemara, Chavias means that the grain that will not be made into flour, grain that will be nashtan. And what they would do is that they would actually transport them dafke when they are in their stalks, because it's much easier to hold on to the grain when they are in the stalks than when you separated them. Then you would, chavias means you would roll them in your hands. The rolling it would separate the chaff from the kernels, and then they would munch on the kernels. When the kernels are caramel, when they're moist, it's geschmack to eat them. So why don't we say by the ones that are not meant to be turned into flour, why don't we say that the chalois chiyuv of ma'asres begins at an earlier stage? Answers the Gemara that ein giduleim lachein. When people plant grain, the primary purpose is to turn it into flour. Even though you have your own, you're going to take a small percent of it and you're going to eat them in kernels, but ladaitoi. But fenugreek mechansan lechein vigdoleim lekein. They are not cultivated to turn them into flour, and therefore the gemara malacha of tilson is way before the gemara malacha of grain. Baruch Hashem, we finished the daf. Tomorrow we're going to start with halacha daled. We should make
Rabbi,
a
review Be'ah Gimel Amud Bet.
One more time. I missed that, Yakir. You're on mute. You're muted yourself.
I'm saying review Be'ah Gimel Amud Bet in the bottom. It'll complete the entire sugya.
This of Tilson.
Yeah.
Chaver Babli Be'ah Dav Gimel Amud Beis.
In the bottom.
Thank you. I don't remember. So now you remind. I'm not even reminded. That's how bad I am. I don't even remember.
Can you post it for us, Yakir? What daf?
Be'ah Gimel Amud Beis.